Before we begin the video, this is a re-upload. I have done this because in the original upload, I decided towards the end to go on a bit of a rant. So I've re-recorded that review segment. And also, my opinion on Matron Bottomley returning for an episode has changed somewhat. I just wanted to make everybody aware, so enjoy the video. Hello everybody and welcome back to another video. I am your host, the OT Astarties, and it is time for yet another Astarties analysis. Now, I've decided to enact a bit of a change around here. So I'm now going to give you guys a visualizer as and when the scenes are playing out, instead of just the thumbnail for the entire video. This will also act as a mini guide in order to show everyone what's going on throughout the scenes, and not me trying to describe everything. So in these few episodes, a past enemy returns, and we meet some new faces. Again. Our opening sequence consists of Brody appearing in front of Sheila as she turns around, surprising her. Rosamund then having a stressful time with her baby, with Brody's presence lingering in the background. And Hetty looking again at the mugshot of Matron Bottomley. Post-title sequence, George rushes past Edwin, who is eager to ask for his help in order to repair something. Alas, George doesn't have the time for anything, in which he walks into Rosamund's baby chaos, leaving her a book about motherhood, and when he enters the scene, he sounds like the Doctor when he says the words, "I think I found the solution." Rosamund does not approve of this book, and just to be cheeky, Emily decides to read an extract from it. All doing this while Constance knocks down some wooden blocks and annoys the hell out of everybody. So Rosamund puts her foot down and tells Emily to look after her for the day. So both children leave the room after Emily challenges her stepmother's request due to a conflicting schedule. Rosamund doesn't understand why William is crying so much and recalls Charles not doing so. So Brody then comes in to fetch Hetty, and she is asked if they have found a nursery maid yet. But there has been no progress of such. Well, you could just ask Elizabeth. However, if she was to return, then we'd have the all that crying was for nothing scenario, and no one wants that in a TV show. Isn't that right, the next step? Now we go to the scullery as Mrs. Whittock's old age is really getting to her as she's lost her menu for the day. Sheila then finds it and Brody walks in asking if everything is clean. After Mrs. Whittock gives a positive response, she leaves to discuss her menu with Rosamund. Sheila feeds back that she's looking for a new challenge outside of the scullery, so inquires about becoming a nursery maid. This is refused, but is then compromised when Brody gives her one day to do something outside of the scullery, which ends up being laundry. So, as you can think, Sheila is not too happy about this, but when she hears crying off in the distance, she scuttles off and seizes the day. Meanwhile, Hetty runs up to Gideon seeking his advice. Jack instead tells her to go inside before Brody catches her, so she responds by labelling him as Manure Boy. So Jack tries to wind her up by attempting to shovel the manure onto her, but Hetty spots Edwin at that very moment. Edwin asks for help, so Jack leaves Gideon with the manure and other jobs to do, including painting the shed. Elsewhere, Agnes is scrubbing the patio and is interrupted by her mother, who informs her that her sister Lizzie will be working with her from now on. So she bustles about and knocks on the door, we'll call her Karen for this moment, and Brody is summoned. Rosamund is reading her book out loud. This segment in particular instructs her to not be so emotional. Sheila then knocks on the door and offers to help Rosamund out, in which she accepts. Back outside, Lizzie's Karen is trying to justify reasons why her daughter should be hired, Yeah, and I'm also wondering if Lizzie is adopted or not. I mean, I take it she's adopted. Brody quite rightly is having none of it, as Lizzie's poor clothes make her seem unfit for purpose. She commands Agnes to escort them both out of the premises, which Karen refuses to do in protest and demands to speak to the manager. Meanwhile, Gideon is busy shoveling the manure. Emily then comes up and offers to help him. At the sight of some paint cans, she then offers to paint the shed. Back inside, Rosamond informs Brody that Sheila will be Constance's nursery maid for the day. She then hears William crying again and heads upstairs. Brody then decides to change her mind and hires Lizzie, not as the nursery maid, but as a scullery maid instead. Overjoyed by this, Karen gets up and leaves, and Agnes takes her sister to the kitchen, and she doesn't want anybody to know that they are related. And I'll give you 3 guesses as to who's been given Sheila's duties while she's off looking after Constance. Hetty. So, Brody approaches and notes that Rosamond was a bit distressed earlier and wonders if it has affected Hetty. She wants her to tell her if there's anything that she can help with, and she heads off. Now to the repair shop, where Edwin and Jack are attempting to fix something as a surprise for George. But it's not going well, so Jack figures that he may have something that can help. Sorry, I was just pretending that this is an episode of the repair shop. Meanwhile, at DIY SOS, Emily suggests to Gideon that they paint the shed as a thank you gesture. She insists this and prepares the paint buckets. We then cut to Hetty, who is beating the ever-living shit out of the rugs, when a delivery man comes and hands her a basket with food in it and a letter. Hetty is in shock as of what the letter reads, as the statement, "By the time this letter reaches you, I'll be very far away." And that voice is Ida Battersea. So now she's gone up the Iron Islands. We immediately cut to Jack, who overhears Sheila playing hide and seek with Constance. She is under the impression by the end of the day she will be the new nursery maid. Jack then heads off and Sheila searches for Constance, who appears to have gone missing. What was Sheila saying? Should be the nursery maid by the end of the day? Yeah, well at this rate you're bound to get sacked. Back to Hetty, who is now crying. She's noticed by Brody, who thinks that she is upset with Rosamond. This is not the case. The case is, Ida is leaving London and going to live by the coast. She is then given a pep talk about the fact that she will leave Calendar Hall eventually as a strong, independent woman. Now to the new intern, Lizzie, who is not starting off well. She has been told to take the compost out, but Mrs. Whittock still can't remember where the bin is. And back to someone else who's not starting off well. Sheila's search for Constance concludes with the little pest being located on top of a stone and refusing to come down. And the picture of Constance is me whenever I'm watching an episode of Doctor Who nowadays. Lizzie comes across the situation and introduces herself to Sheila as the new scullery maid. This confuses her as she darts between telling Constance to get down and talking to Lizzie, who then tells her that she is a replacement as Sheila is now a nursery maid for the day. Constance then somehow teleports down and continues the game of hide and seek. Edwin and Jack are still trying to fix the music box for George. Edwin is doing this to prove to his father that he's not useless and broken. After a prep talk from Jack, Edwin is encouraged to go back into the house and ask for his help. Emily is then continuing to paint the shed and she is enjoying it very much. Agnes then finds Sheila sitting on the floor having successfully calmed down Constance and starts to warn her about other nursery maids didn't last so long, and she does this in the smuggest way possible, which is why I hate her so much. And Constance has woken up, and boy don't we know it, as she starts beating a drum and offers to play hide and seek once again, which forces Sheila to change her mind. So Agnes formulates the idea of getting rid of Lizzie first, in order for Sheila to get her job back. Now we go back to DIY SOS, where Emily shows Gideon her painting, which turns out to be a flowery decoration on the side of the shed, instead of giving it another recoat, which was the original instructions in the first place. This leaves Gideon most unimpressed and very worried about his job, which he blames on Emily. She then leaves and Jack pops up saying that she shouldn't have really been out here, and they go and fetch some more paint in order to fix her mistake. Back in the scullery now, and the tea tray is completed. However, Lizzie points out that she's a complete mess, but this is ignored. Sheila then puts the teapot on the tray, which weighs it down a bit more, and Lizzie leaves. Hetty then arrives and is updated on who she had just passed by Sheila, who defines Lizzie as somebody who is trying to steal her job, and is reminded that they are not in the Foundling Hospital anymore. This exposes Agnes's plan. Sheila is then stared at by Hetty, and she leaves the room, as does Agnes. Hetty then looks in her pocket for Ida's letter, but it seems to have gone missing. The letter is in Rosamond's possession, and she's reading it while carrying the baby. Emily is also sitting on the sofa with a face of gloom and thunder after being blamed for nearly costing Gideon his job. Outside the room, Lizzie is then carrying in the tea. Sheila then comes and snatches it off of her. Rosamond is then telling Emily off when they both hear a crash, so they both go and investigate to see that the tea has gone all over the floor. Brodie also attends the scene, and both Lizzie and Sheila admit that they dropped it. This leaves Brodie no other choice but to fire the both of them. Lizzie's hiring was unknown to Rosamond, so it is explained that she was hired on that morning. Sheila admits that extra help was required as she was in the nursery. She then wishes to stay in the scullery and kitchen as she feels needed there. Rosamond declares that both of their jobs are safe, and they start to tidy up with Emily's help. Brodie is then spoken to about asking her permission before hiring, and is reminded that they still don't have a nursery maid. She then walks in on George and Edwin having successfully repaired the music box. Edwin then runs a successful test, and the couple decide to dance slowly, and Edwin is credited for his idea. We then have a scene of Jack and Gideon getting ready to paint the shed, but see a scone and a drawing with Emily's signature on it, left as a gift. Rosamond then gives Hetty her letter back, as she empathises with her and says that Ida will always be in her heart. As Hetty walks away, we see Brodie lurking in the corner as per usual. We're in the episode of Hetty looking once again at the picture of Matron Bottomley, and she decides to write a letter to her. We move on now to episode 4. And this was the worst episode of the entire show I have seen. Well, you'll see why as we progress. So we begin in the night time as Hetty, this late, gets a reply from Matron Bottomley. She is to visit the prison the very next day. A few moments later, Hetty has a really bad nightmare which features Matron Bottomley, and she screams so loudly she wakes up Sheila. After the title sequence, the scullery crew are all systems go as they prepare breakfast. Brodie reminds everybody that the guests are coming today and assigns everybody posts and takes a shot at Mrs. Whittock by asking if she'd remembered to prepare breakfast. And of course, the calendars are posh people, so what game would they be playing? Croquet. So the setup commences as Jack describes the sport as a boring game for posh people. He uses the word toffs, but toffs means posh people. The differences between football and croquet are pointed out, then Gideon asks if Emily will be playing. It is then presumed that Emily likes Gideon, and this is held off a bit by Jack, who then waves at Hetty through the window, and we cut to the dining hall. Emily is not eager to play as she doesn't see the point in it. George, however, thinks otherwise, as this is a sport for both men and women. Which, of course, is compared to women not getting the vote. And from this moment forward, I knew that there was going to be a feminist lecture within this episode. George then refers to the last episode, as he talks about Edwin having too much fun at the christening. To which Constance refers to Dragon Lady, which is shut down by Rosamond, who then tells Emily that she will enjoy meeting a guest who she presumes is some bloke, but ends up being a feminist writer. Yeah. Constance then gets a lecture about strong women, which is then interrupted by George. Elsewhere, Lizzie complains to Agnes about the calendars having rice for breakfast and mistakenly calls her Aggie as her nickname. She is then told to take out the peelings in a cauldron, but she has forgotten where the compost bin is, so Sheila and Hetty do it instead. They both carry it outside, and Hetty uses this as an opportunity to ask for some help. Before anything can be said, though, they run into the gardening crew, who are then dismissed. Hetty tells Sheila that she needs to sneak out later. Sheila presumes that this is to bunk off work, but is then convinced otherwise. Meanwhile, Emily is reading when a young man appears and begins to compliment her on being interested in world affairs, which is met with hostility until our male feminist simps for the women's rights movement. He then introduces himself as Robert Grenford, who is, you guessed it, Horrible Grandma's grandson. Speaking of which, Horrible Grandma forgives George for the christening incident, and the newly acquainted friends approach. Robert is instantly recognised, and after an awkward silence and a prompt from Lady Grenford, everybody heads off to play croquet. As two carriages pull up to Calendar Hall, Jack is being interrogated because there is an impression that he likes Hetty. Out of one carriage walks Colonel Brigwell, who then tries to help a woman who comes out of the second carriage and gets butchered by... the strong woman. Everybody's making their way to the croquet pitch. Emily and Robert are wheeling Edwin while talking about Jane Austen 3:16. He is trying to hook Emily and Robert up. Further back, Lady Grenford thanks Brodie for informing her about the current events and starts to shun Edwin again. And in the other group who are setting up, Hetty pretends to complain about the heat, but Agnes isn't buying it. Colonel Brigwell and Strong Whammon walk up and meet up with Rosamond, to be spied from afar by Lady Grenford. Strong Whammon, however, recalls an encounter that she had with her. So we go over the field just a bit as Lady Grenford asks her grandson about Emily, and it turns out, according to Robert, that she is gullible and unaware that he is lying. Sheila is in charge of the kitchen, which Mrs. Whittock seems to be unhappy with. It is reported that there are no lemons for the lemonade, so Lizzie is told to go into the cellar to fetch some. She seems to be a bit uneasy about it. Back outside, whilst Brodie is talking to Rosamond, all of a sudden Hetty fakes fainting and is given the afternoon off. Lady Grenford, however, seems to not buy any of it. We then cut to the kitchen and we see Hetty being a bit unsure about going on her mission as she was told to rest. She also is told to fetch Lizzie, who seems to have gone missing whilst fetching some lemons. And Lady Grenford decides to send in Brodie to find Hetty as she is suspicious of her being up to something. Didn't see that coming at all. So we go down to the cellar where Hetty is searching for Lizzie as a side quest from Sheila. Eventually, Lizzie is found looking very frightened. Of course, she denies her fear because she is worried about letting her family down. Hetty then sort of compares her task of seeing Matron Bottomley without really talking about it. So she then has the realisation that if Lizzie can go into the cellar, she can go and see Matron Bottomley. Brodie then checks Hetty's quarters to find that she is not there, confirming her suspicions that she is up to something. Back to our lying simp, who continues to simp over feminists, as Brigwell nearly causes an argument, and is eager to play croquet. And then Strong Wammons decides to suggest that it is Wammons versus Menzies, as she wants it to be her battlefield. She then complains even more about Man Bad and tries to indoctrinate Emily. Back inside, as Brodie bustles around the corridor, Lizzie is returned after Hetty asks Sheila to be nice to her. Brodie then approaches, forcing her to hide for a few seconds. The Mans versus Wammons croquet game is underway, while Brodie confirms Lady Grenford's suspicions. Miss Emily doesn't seem to be doing well, so Robert decides to make her feel better by pretending to be a bad player, which is caught out by Edwin, who then goes to make a comment about it, which is then intervened by Emily until Robert tries to be the honourable gentleman and calls her a wonderful player. And then we get a glimpse at Lady Grenford, whose plan seems to be coming together. And then from a nice croquet game to a dark prison, as we get a shot of Hetty, who enters the prison gates, where Matron Bottomley is being held. And after that few seconds, we immediately go back to the nice croquet game, as Robert is speaking to Lady Grenford, and he vows to send Edwin to an insanitarium. But Lady Grenford discourages his ego and tells him to focus only on Emily. Stay on target. Stay on target. And we now cut back to the prison cell, where Matron Bottomley reunites with Hetty Feather. You can tell that Hetty is still afraid of Matron, as she is told to sit down and talk to her. Matron Bottomley tries to break her enemy by using the risk that this visit poses to her job, and would have preferred it if she was in a workhouse instead. A few lines of dialogue are spoken about Rosamond, and as she is mentioned, we cut to a happy scene for a few moments, and back to the prison. Matron is still resisting her nemesis's reasoning, and she just makes an excuse that she was just trying to survive. And then, not even this scene could be saved from the feminist agenda, as she whines about how hard it is to be a woman. She then asks as to why Rosamond would tell her about the child, and she seems to have forgotten him. Despite this, she estimates that the Calendar family could be ruined by the child, and tries to imagine what he could be like now, and whether he resents the Calendars or not. As we then cut to another happy scene of croquet, where Jack is still in denial that he likes Hetty, and Robert has a little chat with Edwin, and he threatens to cut down the woods, as he is aware he likes nature so much. Edwin wasn't fooled by the cheating earlier, and he is threatened even more when he is spoken to about being sent away. And then we cut back to the prison where Matron Bottomley is trying to turn Hetty against Rosamond. Back at Calendar Hall, Gideon notices that Edwin is not okay and persuades him to tell Emily about the threat that Robert had made and the fact that he had cheated. Hetty's interrogation is not going well, as Matron Bottomley blames everybody at Calendar Hall for her imprisonment, and she will live in Hetty's head rent-free. As Hetty goes to the cell door to leave, she affirms that she has a good life and that although she was scared about coming to see her, she can leave, whereas Matron Bottomley can't. And I bet we're all wondering how that croquet game is going. Not very well for Robert, because Robert and Brigwell have lost the croquet game, and then Emily points out that he cheated. Lady Grenford tries to manipulate the situation by perceiving that he wanted to impress her, which creates a fake telling off and apology. George and Rosamond then try and be nosy buggers and see what's going on, but Emily lies to them. Oh, and also Strong Whammon wins the game. Surprise, surprise. A while afterwards, Robert then fake apologises once again and departs with horrible grandma. Strong Whammonsy's intuition then suggests that Robert is an interesting person, as she suspects, quite rightly, that something is up. Hetty also returns and reports that her visit to Matron Bottomley, which according to Rosamond wasn't needed, made no progress whatsoever, and then goes on to talk about how grateful she is for her family and how perfect things are at the moment. We also see Lady Grenford once more, who is determined to find out what Rosamond's secret is. And we end the episode with Hetty now knowing that Matron Bottomley is in the past. Da da da! Until we cut to Matron Bottomley in prison writing a quite manipulative letter to Charles. I'll save my rant for a bit later. Lizzie's introduction, I feel, was rushed and she just doesn't say much. She feels a bit like a side character at this moment, and it's the first day and all. Sheila's comic timing, however, is on point and is one of the highlights of the episode. One of the few, I should say. And I almost feel sorry for Brodie having to deal with everything that is going on throughout the episode. And as for Ida's letter, I shall discuss that another time because I think I know what happens. But why could she not be honest from her letter? I mean, now she's gone up the Iron Islands, we know what she's going to be doing. She's probably going to be saving Theon Greyjoy, trying to rule a kingdom. I don't like how Sheila was made to look bad in this episode when she's very much against hiring Lizzie. Especially as Agnes is conspiring against her own sister and tries to be snarky towards everybody who disagrees with her. Constance was by far the worst thing about this episode. In fact, I would say she is the most annoying character in the entire show. I didn't mind Emily's side plot where she decorated the shed instead of giving it another coat of paint like Gideon was supposed to. And then as for Mrs. Whittock, someone please fire her because she's getting old and she needs to be replaced with someone much younger. I do find the ending rather sweet when Edwin and George manage to fix the music box together. And we have the ending cliffhanger where we find out that Hetty must speak to Matron Bottomley because she was the one who encouraged Rosamond to get rid of Charles. Now for episode 4, and oh boy did I have a fun time with this one. First of all, can I just point out that the Strong Whammon journalist wannabe here is quite similar to the Strong Whammon explorer who went to the Foundling Hospital in an episode of Series 2. I feel as though this entire episode has been overshadowed by a feminist lecture. And yes, I get it, there was oppression back then as well. Not just for men, but for women as well. But we don't need to bang on about it all the time, please. Don't make this entire episode about the message. The Strong Whammon guest star is very unlikable and annoying. And all that she seems to do is moan about how bad her life is. Now, as for Robert Grenford, I like how he uses every trick in the manipulation book in order to be friends with Emily, and then when he's with Edwin, he absolutely threatens to tear the forest down. He has great villain potential, and his actor does it really well. The problem here is that the feminist agenda is running wild in this episode, and it's kind of portraying men in a bad light, especially young men. I feel as though they're trying to send the message of all men are manipulative and misogynists. I forgot to add greedy as well. I do understand that Robert Grenford is the villain here, and I hope he does get his comeuppance eventually. Now, we also had the return of Matron Bottomley in a prison cell. Again, as per usual, Isabel Clifton and Eva Pope's chemistry is, as usual, on point. And this is also what I wanted to talk about, because I had the opinion that Matron Bottomley should not have returned. But a bit later on in the series, we find out that actually that was a good thing that they saw each other once again. And I think that Hetty and Matron have had one of those stories that will never end until the day that they die. Which is what I think makes these two characters unique. That they both hate each other and they will not stop to bring each other down. Even though Matron Bottomley's in a cell, she will find a way to bring Hetty down, and she bloody well taunts her verbally. The only problem here is that not even this could be saved from the feminist agenda. It was also nice to see Colonel Brigwell again, but strong woman journalists ruined it. The filmmaking perspective is quite clever, because that shot of Hetty outside of the prison is like her about to enter the gates of hell to confront the one demon that has lived rent-free in her head for, well, since she was very young. Also, during the confrontation with Matron Bottomley, I like that when Matron is speaking, we cut between calendars, nice happy croquet game, and the damp and dreary prison. And then the final words obviously are, I can escape and you can't. And of course, this is Hetty facing her fear. If it wasn't for the message, this would have been a good episode. Of course, we get the return of Lady Horrible Grenford Grandma, just sitting there waiting for her plan to come into fruition. Something else that I found annoying was Lizzie being afraid of the dark. However, it is because of Lizzie being afraid of the cellar that Hetty can go and face Matron Bottomley. And I now see the purpose of that scene. And because Hetty can go and see Matron Bottomley, she can finally stand up to her and tell her that she's no longer afraid and that she can't escape prison. So I can kind of look at it that way. Eh, by gum, let's start off with that Lizzie girl. Oh, well, if I could have foundlings in my kitchen, Sheila and Agnes can have some girl off the streets as well. Meanwhile, as well, what the hell's going on with that Mrs. Whittock lady? She's bloody inefficient is what she is, and she needs sacking this instant. And I don't think looking after children is what's best for Sheila, isn't it? Wanting to be like her best bud Elizabeth, hoping that they meet up at some crossover event. She were best working in the kitchens. That I can agree with Mrs. Whittock on. And that Matron Bottomley being visited in prison, oh, you go, Hetty. You tell her what for. And then we have that Emily whining and crying about feminism. You rich people have it soft. In my day, at the age of 7, I walked up a very steep hill, because there's lots of hills in Yorkshire, with a loaf of bread. So if you think that living life as a woman is hard and women don't have it easy, then I should think again, my gal. And that Colonel Brigwell, well, it's nice to see him again. Maybe he's finally left the Foundling Hospital behind, after my replacement decided to ruin every meal and make it modern. Anywho, that's my comments for today. Well, ladies and gentlemen, that ends today's video, and I'd like to thank you all very much for watching, and I will see you all later. So, arigato, sayonara,